A King Dethroned subscribe now so you don't miss the most shocking stories. Imagine your life is a perfect postcard of success. A paradise on the coast, the sun glinting over the Mediterranean, a dazzling woman by your side. Then, in the middle of a crowd, you see a ghost from your past. But this ghost isn't just a memory. She is horribly pregnant, and the baby is yours. What do you do in that moment? Do you keep walking, or do you confront the perfect lie? The sun rose over Valencia like a newly minted gold coin, ostentatious and blinding. Alexander felt its warmth on his shoulders, a pleasant weight that mirrored the heat of Victoria's hand in his. Her laughter, a sound designed for brunch menus and yacht decks, tinkled beside him. This was his life now, a curated postcard of success. The crisp white linen of his immaculate shirt, the soft sand yielding under his Italian loafers, the woman beside him whose beauty was both a comfort and a statement. It was perfect. It was a lie. And then he saw her. The world slowed to the thick pace of a nightmare. Amidst the scattered families and laughing teenagers, a solitary figure walked near the water's edge. Her pregnancy was unmistakable, a proud, defiant curve against the infinite blue of the sea. She wore a simple dress, faded to the color of a pale sky, and her dark hair was a mess, tousled by the salty wind. It was the way she moved that struck him first, the slight limp she'd had since a childhood fall, the stubborn set of her shoulders. That familiarity bypassed his brain and hit him directly in the stomach. Clara. He hadn't seen her in 8 months, since the lawyers had finished cleaning up their shared life, erasing the vows, and leaving only the sterile language of divorce settlements. He had told himself it was for the best, a clean break. He had sent the checks, insulated himself with work and the seamless company of Victoria, and had almost convinced himself that Clara had simply ceased to exist. But there she was, a ghost under the Valencia sun, impossibly real and devastatingly pregnant. His child. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the breath from him. He remembered the last conversation, a frantic, tear-filled call he had taken on his way to a board meeting. "I'm pregnant, Alex. Please, we have to talk." He had dismissed her, a last desperate plea. He told her to have her lawyer contact his. The memory was acidic in his throat. "Alexander, darling, you look like you've seen a ghost," Victoria whispered, her fingers tightening on his hand. Her voice, usually a calming balm, was now a grating intrusion. He couldn't answer. His gaze was fixed on Clara. She had stopped walking, one hand on her lower back, the other cradling her belly. Her face, even at this distance, was etched with a profound weariness that felt like a personal accusation. The ocean breeze plastered the thin fabric of her dress to her body, outlining the swell of her stomach, her new and sacred shape, a shape he had helped create and then abandoned. The feeling of public shame, a sensation he hadn't experienced since he was a child who had wet the bed, washed over him. He was Alexander, a titan of private equity, a man whose image was as carefully managed as his portfolio, and 50 yards away was the living, breathing, pregnant proof of his deepest failure. People were looking. He could feel their eyes, the whispers that would soon ignite the social circuits of the Costa del Azahar. Clara took another step, and then faltered. Her body swayed, a fragile reed in the wind. Her hand went from her belly to her head, as if trying to hold herself together. Her knees buckled. "Oh my God," Victoria whispered, a note of theatrical horror in her voice. "Is that woman all right?" Time seemed to fracture. Part of him, the cold, calculating part that had built his empire, screamed at him to turn around, to walk away, to pretend he saw nothing. It was a PR disaster, a personal catastrophe. Victoria was already pulling on his arm, her self-preservation instinct engaged. "Alexander, let's go. We shouldn't get involved." But his feet were glued to the sand. He saw Clara's face, pale as sea foam. Her eyes rolled back. She collapsed. Not in a graceful faint, but in a sudden, sickening collapse. Her body hit the wet sand with a soft thud that resonated like a gunshot in the sudden silence of his mind. A collective gasp rippled across the beach. People began to run toward her. A woman screamed for someone to call an ambulance. The perfect curated postcard of his life had just gone up in flames. For one frozen moment, he was just a man watching the mother of his unborn child fall unconscious on the sand. The title, the wealth, the mistress, it all dissolved in the salty air, leaving only the raw, searing agony of his betrayal. The lie he had built was crumbling, as surely as she had, and in its rubble he could only stare, paralyzed by the enormity of what he had done. The sterile, antiseptic smell of the Santa Catalina hospital was a harsh reality after the open, salty air of the beach. Alexander strode through the automatic doors, his mind a whirlwind of panic and guilt. He had left a furious Victoria in the car, her protests about image and scandal fading into the roar of his own heartbeat. He had followed the ambulance, driving his Aston Martin with a reckless abandon that mirrored the chaos within him. He arrived at the emergency reception desk, his voice clipped and authoritative. "I'm here for Clara Sanchez. She was just brought in from the beach." The receptionist, a sturdy, tired-eyed woman named Marga, looked up from her computer, unimpressed by his tailored suit or the urgency in his tone. "Are you family?" The question hung in the air, a simple bureaucratic inquiry that cut him to the core. He hesitated. "I'm her ex-husband." The words tasted like ash. Marga's fingers clacked on the keyboard. "Her emergency contact is a Donato Espinosa. He's on his way." "I'm sorry, sir, but due to privacy regulations, I can only give out information to immediate family or the designated contact." "I'm the father of her child," he snapped, feeling the words were as much a desperate declaration as a damning confession. The woman's expression didn't soften. If anything, a flash of disapproval crossed her face. "That doesn't change the paperwork, sir. You'll have to wait in the designated waiting room." She gestured vaguely to a collection of uncomfortable plastic chairs, where people sat in various states of anxious, powerless dread. Alexander, who could get the mayor on the phone with a single text, was being stonewalled by a hospital receptionist. The irony was suffocating. He had willingly signed the papers that had severed their legal ties, effectively erasing his right to be there, to know if she was okay, if their baby was okay. It was a self-inflicted wound, and it was bleeding him dry. He retreated to the waiting room, the harsh fluorescent lights exposing every flaw in his composure. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Victoria's name. A dozen messages had already come through. "This is a nightmare, Alex. My phone is blowing up. Did you have to run after her like that? Think of the photos. My agent just called. The press is asking for a comment. We have to get ahead of this. Call Andrew. Now." He ignored them all. His mind flashed back to another call, months ago. He was in a company car, stuck in city traffic, on his way to close a major deal. Clara's name had flashed on the screen. He had let it go to voicemail, annoyed by the interruption. He had listened to it later, her voice small and shaky. "Alex, I didn't want to do this over the phone. I'm pregnant. I know everything is a mess, but it's yours. Please, can we just talk? Not with lawyers, just us." He had deleted the message. He had rationalized it as a pathetic last-ditch effort to get back into his life, to get a bigger settlement. He had instructed his lawyer, Andrew, to make it clear that all communication must go through legal channels. He had built a wall of money and lawyers around himself, and now he was on the wrong side of it, desperate to get in. A doctor in blue scrubs emerged from a set of double doors, his face grim. Alexander leaped to his feet, but the doctor walked past him to an elderly couple huddled in the corner. Alexander sank back into his chair, the brief rush of adrenaline leaving him feeling hollow. He was a ghost here, a specter from a past life with no rights in the present. He had paid a fortune to become a stranger to Clara, and the universe, it seemed, had cashed the check. What would you have done in Alexander's shoes? Would you have stayed to face the consequences, or run away to protect your reputation? Let me know in the comments below. Every tick of the clock on the wall was a fresh torment. Was she awake? Was the baby alive? The questions were an incessant pounding against the inside of his skull. He thought of her collapse, the way her body had just given out. Had she been alone all this time, struggling, while he was choosing wines with Victoria and pretending his past didn't exist? The weight of his emotional abandonment settled on him, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just the divorce, the affair. It was the deliberate, calculated way he had silenced her. He had denied her her humanity. He had treated her pleas as a business nuisance to be managed. Finally, an older man with a kind, weathered face and a shock of white hair strode into the waiting room. He exuded a quiet strength, his expression a mixture of fear and fierce protectiveness. He went straight to the desk. "I'm David Espinoza. I'm here for Clara Sanchez." Marga's demeanor changed instantly. "Of course, Mr. Espinoza. Right this way. Dr. Prieto is waiting to speak with you." As David walked past, his eyes met Alexander's. There was no flash of surprise, just a deep, abysmal contempt that was more hurtful than any verbal assault. In that single look, Alexander saw himself as David must see him. A destructive force, a man who broke beautiful things and walked away from the rubble. David didn't say a word. He simply held Alexander's gaze a second longer before disappearing through the double doors, leaving Alexander alone in the waiting room, a dethroned king in a kingdom of plastic chairs and sterile silence. An hour passed, every minute an eternity. Alexander paced the small waiting room, ignoring the insistent buzzing of his phone. He had finally sent Andrew a single, clipped message. "Handle the press, no comment." It was a reflex, a play from his corporate playbook, but it felt utterly empty. The double doors opened again. David Espinoza emerged, his face still grim, but the sharp edge of panic had softened into something closer to tired resolve. Alexander immediately closed the distance between them. "How is she?" Alexander's voice was hoarse. David stopped, looking at him with the same cold disdain as before. "She's stable. The baby is too for now. Severe dehydration, exhaustion, and a spike in her blood pressure. The doctor called it a pre-eclamptic warning. They'll keep her for observation." The relief, so potent it made him dizzy, flooded through Alexander. "Thank God. Can I see her?" David's laugh was a short, bitter bark. "You really think you have the right to ask that?" "She's carrying my child, David. I have every right." "A right you forfeited when you sent her legal notices instead of answering her calls," David shot back, his voice low but vibrating with anger. "A right you signed away in a document that paid you for the privilege of your own absence. You don't get to waltz in now, smelling of expensive cologne and guilt, and pretend you're anything more than the cause of this." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and they all hit their mark. "I didn't know," Alexander said, the excuse sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "I thought she was..." You thought she was lying, trying to manipulate you? David finished, his eyes boring into Alexander's. Because that's what you do, isn't it, Alexander? You evaluate people as threats or as assets. Clara was an asset until she wasn't, so you liquidated her. Did you ever, for 1 second, stop to consider that she was just a person? A terrified, pregnant woman you once promised to love and protect. The truth of the accusation left him speechless. He had done that. He had reduced the woman he once loved, the woman who knew his fears and his dreams, to a line item on a ledger he was trying to close. I want to see her, Alexander repeated, his voice quieter now, stripped of its usual authority. It was a plea. David studied him for a long moment, a silent battle playing out behind his eyes. She's sleeping, he finally said. The doctor gave her a mild sedative. I'll ask her when she wakes up. But I'm telling you now, Alexander, if she says no, you'll turn around and walk out of this hospital. You will not cause another scene. You've done enough damage for 1 lifetime. He had no choice but to agree. He retreated to his chair, feeling like a supplicant. Another hour passed. Finally, David reappeared in the door and gave a clipped, almost imperceptible nod. Alexander's heart hammered against his ribs as he followed David down the hall. The air became quieter, filled with the soft beeps and hums of medical machinery. They stopped in front of a room, number 314. David paused, his hand on the door. She's awake. She agreed to see you for 5 minutes. Do not upset her. Upset. Alexander nodded, his throat tight. He opened the door and walked in. Clara was propped up on pillows, an IV taped to the back of her hand. The color had returned to her cheeks, but her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. She looked fragile, yet her gaze, when it settled on him, was as hard as steel. The silence in the room was thick with unspoken history, with betrayal and pain. Clara, he whispered her name. What do you want, Alexander? Her voice was raw but steady. There was no pleading, no tears, just a chilling emptiness. He walked to the bed, his hands feeling useless at his sides. I'm so sorry. I saw you on the beach. I had no idea. You had no idea I was still pregnant? She asked, a flicker of bitter humor in her eyes. Or you had no idea I was poor enough to be walking on a public beach instead of lounging at a private club? That's not fair. Fair? A weak, incredulous laugh escaped her. You want to talk about fair? It was fair when I called you, begging you to just talk to me, and got a letter from your lawyer threatening me with a harassment suit. It was fair when I found out you were vacationing on the Amalfi Coast with her from a gossip magazine, while I was throwing up every morning, terrified I was going to lose this baby. He flinched. I can help. Anything you need. Money, doctors, a place to live, whatever it is. Just name what you want. It was his default setting, his solution to every problem. Write a check. Her expression hardened into something close to disgust. You still don't get it, do you? You think you can abandon a person and then just buy your way back into their life when it's convenient? This isn't a hostile takeover, Alexander. This is a baby. My baby. A human life. And it's not for sale. The rejection was absolute. A door slammed shut in his face. She wasn't asking for his money. She was demanding his humanity, the very part of himself he had systematically dismantled in pursuit of his success. What do you want from me, then? He asked, his voice breaking. Right now, she said, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. I want you to leave. Your 5 minutes are up. He stood there, frozen, the chasm between them wider than ever. He had come to fix things, to manage the situation. But he was realizing, with a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating, that some things couldn't be bought, fixed, or managed. Some debts were paid not in dollars, but in something far more costly. And he hadn't even begun to understand the currency. The drive back to his sterile, glass-walled beach house was a blur. Alexander walked in to find Victoria on the phone, her voice a carefully modulated mix of indignation and victimhood. She was pacing the marble floor of the living room, a flute of champagne in her hand. "Unbelievable, I know. He just left me there. Of course, my concern is for the woman, but the sheer humiliation." She saw him, and her expression hardened. "I have to call you back." She ended the call and confronted him. "Well, is your little charity case all sorted?" The casual cruelty of her words hit him like a physical blow. "Her name is Clara," he said, his voice dangerously low. "And she collapsed. She's in the hospital. She could have lost the baby." "Oh, please," Victoria scoffed, taking a delicate sip of champagne. "How terribly dramatic and convenient, just when you happen to walk by. Don't you see what this is, Alexander? It's a setup. She's a gold digger, and she just hit the jackpot. The press is going to have a field day with the story of the poor pregnant ex-wife collapsing at the feet of the heartless millionaire and his new girlfriend. It's not a story, Victoria. It's my life. It's our life," she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "The life I've worked very hard to build with you. The brand, the image. Do you have any idea what this does to us? To me? I'm not just your girlfriend. I'm a brand ambassador. My reputation is tied to yours. This mess you've made, it threatens everything." He looked at her then, really looked at her. He saw the perfectly coiffed hair, the designer dress, the flash of panic and calculation in her eyes. He had chosen her because she was easy. She was uncomplicated, a beautiful accessory who asked for nothing more than his money could provide. She was the antithesis of Clara, who had challenged him, who had demanded his heart, his attention, his soul. He had fled that complexity into this empty gilded cage. "This isn't about a brand," he said, the realization dawning on him with sickening clarity. "This is about a child. My child." Victoria's face twisted into a mask of fury and fear. "So that's it? You run back to her? After everything I've done for you, supported you through that ugly divorce, helped you rebuild your image?" "You helped me build a lie," he replied, the words tasting bitter. "And it just collapsed on a beach." She stepped toward him, her eyes burning. "You need to handle this, Alexander. You need to silence her, pay her off, get her to sign an NDA so strict she can't even whisper your name. If you don't, she'll poison everything. She's a threat to us, to me, and you need to decide who you're going to protect." The threat was Clara. It wasn't just about PR. It was about her position, her security. Clara and the baby were an existential threat to the world Victoria had so carefully constructed. "You were never more to me than a distraction," he said, the words as cruel as they were true. "And the distraction is over." He hung up the phone, his hand shaking. The fury receded, replaced by a cold, sick dread. He thought of Clara, alone in her small apartment, likely seeing this article at that very moment. This public humiliation, this vicious attack, was happening because of him. He had brought Victoria into his life, and in doing so, he had brought this plague down upon Clara. He had ended things with Victoria, but the damage was already done. He had finally burned the bridge to his past, but in doing so, he had set fire to the very ground where he was trying to build a new foundation. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Clara's name, knowing with absolute certainty that this time an air conditioner wouldn't be enough to fix what he had allowed to break. How do you rebuild trust After such a devastating betrayal and public humiliation. Is it even possible? Let me know what you think in the comments. The call to Clara was the hardest he had ever made. He expected screaming, tears, accusations. He got something far worse. A quiet, profound exhaustion. "I saw it, Alexander," she said, before he could even apologize. Her voice was flat, empty. "A friend from work sent me the link. Congratulations. You've succeeded in painting me as a manipulative, cheating whore to the entire world. Clara, I am so sorry. It was Victoria. I've ended it with her. It's over. I swear I had nothing to do with that. It doesn't matter if you did, or if you just stood by and let it happen," she replied, her voice breaking with a pain that cut him to the core. "The outcome is the same. My name is Mud. My picture is everywhere. People I know are looking at me differently. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" He didn't. He had always been the one in control of the narrative, the one who paid publicists to shape his image. He had never been on the receiving end of a public dissection. "I'll fix this," he vowed, reverting to old instincts. "I'll have Andrew issue a statement. We'll sue the blog for defamation. I'll spend whatever it takes to clear your name." "No," she said, her voice firm. "No more statements. No more lawyers. No more public battles. That's your world, Alexander, not mine. Every time you try to fix things, you just make a bigger mess. Just stay away from me. Please, I can't take any more of this. I need to protect myself. I need to protect this baby." She hung up. The finality in her voice was absolute. He had been completely shut out. For the first week, he honored her request. It was agony. He felt like a phantom limb, an amputated part of a family he was desperate to join. The silence was a roar in his ears. He instructed Andrew to issue a single, laconic statement. "The story is a malicious fabrication. Mr. Vera has the utmost respect for his ex-wife, Ms. Sanchez, and asks that the media respect her privacy at this time." And he also had his legal team send a cease and desist letter so threatening that the blog retracted the story within hours. But the damage was done. The lie was out there, living in social media feeds and in the minds of strangers. He realized she was right. His methods, the money, the power, the legal threats, were a foreign language in the country of her pain. They were the tools of the man who had hurt her, not the tools of the man who might possibly heal her. He needed a new currency, so he started showing up. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet consistency. He learned her schedule through David. He knew her weekly obstetrician appointment was on Tuesday mornings. The first Tuesday. He parked his car across the street from her building at 8 a.m. At 8:30, he watched her leave, her movements slow and careful, and begin the long 4-block walk to the bus stop. He didn't approach her. He just watched, his heart aching with every step she took. The next Tuesday, he did the same. But this time, as she locked her door, he sent her a text message. "My car is across the street. I can drive you to your appointment. I won't speak if you don't want me to. I'll just drive. If you don't want me to, I'll understand." He watched her read the message, her body tensing. She looked across the street and saw his car. For an entire minute, she stood there, wrestling with herself. Then, with a deep sigh, she walked not to the bus stop, but to him. She got in the car and didn't say a word. Neither did he. He drove her to the doctor's office. The silence was thick, but not entirely hostile. It was a truce. When they arrived, she started to get out. "I'll wait here," he said, "to drive you home." She paused, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and went inside. It became their weekly ritual. He drove her. They sat in silence. He waited. He drove her home. It was a strange, silent penance. He was no longer her ex-husband or her lover. He was her chauffeur, a background character in the story of her pregnancy. But he was there. Slowly, other small acts followed. He learned from a passing comment David had made that she had a craving for a specific brand of pickles. He drove to a store, bought 3 jars, and left them in a bag outside her apartment door with a simple note. Just in case. He started reading. Not financial reports, but parenting books. He read about trimesters and fetal development. He filled the empty spaces in his life not with deals and conquests, but with knowledge about the child he was determined to know. One afternoon, as he drove her home after an appointment, she finally spoke. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery. "Because you told me the baby deserves a father," he replied honestly. "And you were right. I'm trying to learn how to be one. Buying pickles and reading books doesn't make you a father, Alexander." "I know," he said. "Being present does. Consistency, reliability, showing up. That's what I failed at. That's what I'm trying to learn now." She was silent for the rest of the ride, but when he pulled up to her building, she didn't get out right away. "The baby's room needs to be painted," she said, still not looking at him. "And I can't do it myself. The fumes." It was the first time she had asked him for anything. Not money, not a grand gesture, just his time, his effort, his presence. "What color?" he asked, his heart swelling with a fragile, painful hope. "A soft yellow," she said, "like the sun." He promised to come with paint on Saturday morning. She finally turned and looked at him. Her eyes were still guarded, her trust a distant shore he might never reach. But for the first time, he saw something other than pain in them. It was a flicker of recognition. A recognition that his new currency, the simple, unglamorous currency of showing up, was finally beginning to register. Saturday arrived, and Alexander showed up not in a sports car, but in a rental van, loaded with cans of low VOC paint, rollers, brushes, and drop cloths. He spent the entire day in Clara's small, stuffy spare room, taping the edges, and methodically painting the walls a pale yellow. Clara stayed in the living room, ostensibly on bed rest, but he could feel her presence, her quiet observation of his work. They didn't talk much. He would ask a question. "Do you want me to paint the trim white?" And she would give a simple answer. But the shared space, the domesticity of the task, began to erode the formal distance between them. He saw her world up close, the worn armchair, the second-hand books covering the shelves, the single-framed photo of her late mother on the mantel. This was the life she had built from the ashes of the one he had burned. It was small and humble, but it was hers, and it was real. The quiet, steady rhythm of their lives continued for weeks. The Tuesday drives, the occasional errand. He assembled a crib for her, his brow furrowed in concentration over the inscrutable instructions. He installed baby gates, even though she was months away from needing them. Each task was a small, steady brick in a foundation he was desperately trying to lay. He was becoming a fixture, a reliable presence that no longer made her flinch. Trust wasn't spoken, but it was there, a fragile shoot in the scorched earth of their past. Then came the call. It was just after 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in late autumn. He was asleep in his city apartment when his phone rang on the bedside table. He saw her name and woke instantly. His blood turned to ice. "Alexander." Her voice was tight with pain, breathless. "Clara, what's wrong? Is it the baby?" I don't know," she gasped. "I have cramps, really bad, and I think my water just broke. It's too early, Alex. I'm only 34 weeks. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded him. "I'm on my way. Call 911. "No, there's no time. I can't. David is away. I tried to call a taxi. They said it would be 40 minutes. Alexander, please, I'm scared." The raw fear in her voice erased any remaining distance between them. She had called him. In her moment of terror, she had reached for him. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice a rock of calm he didn't feel. "Hold on, Clara. I'm coming." He moved faster than he ever had in his life. He got dressed, grabbed his keys. He broke every speed limit on the deserted late-night roads, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. His mind was a frantic prayer. Please let her be okay. Please let the baby be okay. He found her on the floor of her living room, her face pale and beaded with sweat. He gently helped her to her feet, wrapped her in a blanket, and carried her down the 4 flights of stairs to his car. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and her sharp, pained gasps from the passenger seat. The ER staff swarmed them the moment he pulled up. They took her away on a gurney, her hand reaching for his, for a fleeting second before she disappeared through the double doors. And then he was alone again, back in the waiting room, where this nightmare had begun months ago. But this time was different. He wasn't a ghost. When the nurse came to get his information, he knew the answers. He knew her doctor's name, her due date, her allergies. He was now on her intake form, right under David, as her emergency contact. A small bureaucratic change that felt like a seismic shift. Hours passed. He called David, who was distraught and promised to take the first flight back. He paced. He drank bitter coffee from a vending machine. He prayed to a god he wasn't sure he believed in. Finally, just as the first gray light of dawn was breaking, Dr. Prieto, the same doctor from before, appeared. Her face was tired, but calm. "Mr. Vera." He searched her face, bracing himself for the worst. Is the baby?" Clara had a placental abruption, likely related to her preeclampsia, the doctor explained. "It was critical. We had to perform an emergency C-section, but she's stable now. She's in recovery." He slumped against the wall in relief. "And the baby?" Dr. Prieto smiled. "You have a daughter. She's small. She's a little under 5 pounds, and she's in the NICU as a precaution. But she's breathing on her own. She's a fighter." A daughter. The words resonated deep in his soul. He had a daughter. "Can I see them?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "You can see your daughter now," she said. "Clara will be out of recovery in about an hour." He followed a nurse through a maze of corridors to the neonatal intensive care unit. After scrubbing his hands raw, he was led to a small, clear incubator. And there she was, so tiny, so impossibly perfect, with a little shock of dark hair just like her mother's. She was hooked up to monitors that emitted soft beeps, but her tiny chest rose and fell with a steady, determined rhythm. He reached a hand through the portal and gently placed a finger on her small hand, which latched on. Her impossibly tiny fingers curled around his. In that moment, the entire world fell away. The money, the power, the mistakes, the betrayals. None of it mattered. All that existed was the overwhelming, terrifying, unconditional love for this one small, fragile human being. This was his daughter, his responsibility, his redemption. He too didn't know how long he stood there, just watching her breathe. When he finally went to Clara's room, he found her awake, pale but lucid. He walked to the bed, his heart too full for words. She looked at him, her eyes filled with the same awe and exhaustion he felt. "Did you see her?" Clara said, a tear rolling down her cheek. "She's perfect," he managed to say. "She's beautiful, just like her mother." He sat in the chair beside her bed and, for the first time, took her hand. She didn't pull away. They sat in an exhausted, shared silence. They were no longer exes. They were no longer adversaries. They were simply two parents, forever linked by a fierce, miraculous love for the little girl fighting for her life one floor below. The longest night of their lives was over, and in its wake, a new, uncertain day was dawning. 2 weeks later, the baby, whom Clara had named Hope, was discharged from the NICU. The apartment he had once seen as a symbol of her struggle was now a baby's room, bathed in the soft yellow light of the walls he had painted. It was cluttered with diapers, bottles, and the beautiful chaos of a new life. Their new reality was a strange dance of co-parenting. It wasn't a rekindled romance. There were no grand declarations of love or forgiveness. Instead, their interactions were based on the mundane, essential logistics of keeping a tiny human being alive. Their conversations were about feeding schedules, doctor's appointments, and whose turn it was to soothe the baby at 3 a.m. Yet within this routine, something new was taking root. He saw the fierce, tireless love in the way Clara held Hope, the soft lullabies she sang when she thought no one was listening. And she saw him. She saw him expertly swaddle their daughter, a skill he had learned from a YouTube video at 4 a.m. She saw him pace endlessly in the small living room, rocking a fussy Hope on his shoulder until she finally fell asleep. She saw him not as the billionaire who had abandoned her, but as Hope's father, a man who showed up, a man who stayed. That evening, an autumn chill rattled the window panes. Hope was sleeping in her bassinet next to the sofa, making soft, cooing sounds. Alexander had just finished washing the dishes from dinner, Chinese takeout eaten from their cartons, while Clara watched him, a thoughtful, unreadable expression on her face. He dried his hands and sat in the worn armchair across from her. The silence was comfortable now, a shared space rather than an empty one. "David called today," she said, her voice soft. "He's happy you've been here." "I'm glad to be here," he said, simply. It was the truest thing he had ever said. The boardrooms and billion-dollar deals of his old life felt like a dream from another existence. This small apartment, with the scent of baby powder and the quiet breathing of his daughter, felt like the only real place in the world. "This is hard, Alexander," she admitted, finally looking at him. "Seeing you here, remembering everything. Sometimes I'm still so angry with you I can barely breathe." "I know," he said, his gaze unwavering. "You have every right to be. I don't expect you to forgive me, Clara. Maybe never. All I can do is try to be the father that Hope deserves." She looked at their daughter, her expression softening. "She deserves everything." She looked back at him. "What happens now? What is this?" It was the question that hung between them every day. They weren't a couple. They weren't just co-parents. They were something in between. Two people bound by a painful past and a precious, hopeful future. "I don't know," he confessed. "We're writing a new book, I guess, and we're just on the first page." He hesitated, then took a leap. "It's getting late. Can I stay on the sofa in case you need help with the night feeding?" Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his. She saw no agenda, no manipulation, just a tired man offering his presence. She thought of the long, lonely nights ahead, the overwhelming weight of being a new mother. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Okay, Alexander, you can stay." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise of a future together. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acceptance. It was a single, shaky step onto the new path they were forging together. A path not back to what they had lost, but towards something they had yet to define. He had once tried to erase her, but now, in this small, quiet room, he had finally found his place in her story. Not as the villain, not even as the hero, but simply as a man, present on the page, ready to see what the next chapter would bring. The journey of healing is never a straight line. Can trust, once shattered, ever truly be whole again? What does redemption really look like, day by day, in the quiet moments between the dramatic scenes? The story of Alexander and Clara is far from over. If you believe in second chances and the power of showing up, let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that explore the complicated and beautiful landscape of the human heart. The Magnate's Undoing. Subscribe now to make sure you don't miss the most shocking stories. Paradise is a cage. A tycoon's secret getaway is the ultimate fantasy. A private jet, turquoise waters, and a beautiful lover. But the woman waiting for him on the tarmac wasn't a hostess. She was his 9-month pregnant wife. And this man's world, a titan of business, didn't just crumble. It was confiscated. Because she wasn't just his wife. She was the owner of the plane. This is a story of intelligent revenge and a woman's triumph that will make you cheer, cry, and applaud. Alexander believed in the laws of his own universe. At 40, he was the charismatic, sharp CEO of Alexander Holdings. A man who didn't just build skyscrapers, he reshaped skylines. His life was a curated collection of acquisitions, a luxurious penthouse overlooking Central Park in New York, a garage housing a fleet of envy-inducing cars, and a Patek Philippe Grand Complications watch worth more than most homes. His most prized acquisition, however, was his wife, Victoria. She wasn't just beautiful. She was art. A descendant of a line of Italian financiers, she possessed a quiet intelligence and an unshakable grace that made Alexander look less like a ruthless magnate and more like a statesman. For 7 years, she had been the perfect partner, organizing his charity galas, charming his business rivals, and providing a serene sanctuary from the wild world of Manhattan real estate. Now she was 9 months pregnant with their first child, a son. This, for Alexander, was the final jewel in his crown, a legacy, an heir. Yet, in the silent, air-conditioned air of their penthouse, cracks were starting to show in the golden facade. Victoria, with her body transformed by the new life inside her, had become more introspective. Her conversations, once centered on art auctions and social events, now revolved around nursery colors and birth plans. She had a new glow, but her attention was focused on the baby. Alexander felt a restless unease. He loved Victoria, or more accurately, he loved the idea of her. The perfect wife, the mother of his child. But the primal, visceral reality of pregnancy, the swollen ankles, and the smell of prenatal vitamins seemed domestic, mundane. It was a tether to a reality he had spent his life trying to transcend. His restlessness found a name: Isabella. Isabella was 20 sus, an ambitious junior architect at his firm, with eyes the color of a summer sky, and a hunger Alexander recognized because it mirrored his own. She saw him not as a future father, but as the titan he was. She didn't want to talk about obstetrician appointments. She wanted to talk about the impossible cantilever design for Alexander's new tower in Dubai. She looked at him with an intoxicating mix of awe and ambition, a potent cocktail for a man whose ego was beginning to feel starved. The affair began predictably. Late nights at the office, a shared bottle of scotch over blueprints, a hand that lingered a moment too long. It quickly escalated to clandestine meetings in boutique hotels and whispered promises. To Isabella, Alexander was a god, offering her a glimpse of Olympus. For Alexander, Isabella was an escape, a reaffirmation of the man he was before the looming reality of fatherhood. The lie came easily. "Another trip, darling?" Victoria asked, her hand resting protectively on the perfect sphere of her belly. She was arranging a bouquet of white peonies on their marble table. "I'm afraid so," Alexander said, loosening his tie. He kissed the top of her head, inhaling the familiar scent of her Chanel No. 5. "The new development. The local council is making things difficult with permits. I need to get down there, shake some hands, remind them who feeds them." It was a plausible lie. Alexander Holdings had a major luxury resort project underway in the Caribbean. For how long? Her voice was soft, with a weariness he chose to interpret as simple pregnancy fatigue. 3 nights, 4 at most. I'll be back long before this little guy decides to make his debut. He knelt, placing a hand on her belly. The baby gave a firm, solid kick against his palm. For a second, a genuine pang of something, perhaps guilt, perhaps love, shot through him. He quickly suppressed it. Business was business. Pleasure was pleasure. He was adept at keeping them separate. "Be careful," she whispered, her eyes searching his. "I don't like you flying so much right now." "I'll be on the company jet. It's safer than crossing the street in this city," he said, with a reassuring smile. He was a master of the lie because he believed in his own justifications. This trip wasn't just an affair, it was a necessity. He needed this release to be a better husband, a better father. It was a pressure valve. As he packed his suitcase that night, light clothes, expensive sunglasses, a bottle of his favorite tanning oil tucked in a side pocket, he felt a familiar thrill. The thrill of the gamble, of having it all. The perfect wife, the adoring mistress, the empire in the air. He was Alexander. The rules of common men didn't apply. He didn't notice the way Victoria watched him from the doorway, her expression unreadable. He saw only what he wanted to see, the perfect, trusting, pregnant wife, blissfully unaware of the parallel life he lived with such expertise. The ride to the private airport was a transition between worlds. The black SUV wound its way through the traffic, leaving behind the silent elegance of their neighborhood for the raw power and exclusivity of private aviation. As the airport doors slid open, Alexander felt the last vestiges of guilt evaporate, replaced by a rush of adrenaline. This was his true element. Isabella was already waiting in the lavish minimalist lounge, looking like a billionaire's perfect companion. She wore a cream silk jumpsuit that glowed under the dim light, her blonde hair catching the light. She was nervous energy and dazzling beauty, a stark contrast to Victoria's serene classicism. She leaped to her feet at the sight of him with a wide, unreserved smile. "I was so worried you'd be late." "The sun doesn't rise until I say so, darling," he murmured, handing his briefcase to an assistant. "And our trip awaits." Their trip was on a VistaJet Bombardier Global 7152. It sat on the tarmac like a sleek silver predator, its distinctive red stripe a mark of pure audacity. To Isabella, who had grown up in a suburban home, it was breathtaking. It wasn't just a plane, it was a statement. The flight attendant, a polished woman named Anya, greeted them on the stairs. "Mr. Evans, welcome aboard. We have the 2008 Dom Perignon chilling, as requested." "Excellent, Anya. You know the way to my heart," Alexander said, with his natural charm. He led Isabella to the cabin, and her jaw literally dropped. This wasn't a plain interior. It was a gravity-defying penthouse suite. Cream leather club seats, polished dark wood, soft cashmere blankets folded on a divan that could convert into a bed. A full kitchen was visible, where a private chef was already plating hors d'oeuvres. "Alexander, this is insane," Isabella whispered, running her hand over the soft leather. "It's just a business tool," he said, savoring the look of awe on her face. "Time is the only commodity I can't buy, so I make sure I don't waste it." As the jet began its powerful ascent, they sat across from each other, sipping champagne. The bubbles tickled Isabella's nose, and she laughed, a sound that felt young and carefree. Alexander watched her, feeling a sense of deep satisfaction. This was real. The weight of his responsibilities, the impending birth, the silent expectations of his life with Victoria. It all evaporated at 40,000 feet. "Then," Isabella began, her voice a little more serious, "tell me about the project. I brought my tablet with the revised mock-ups for the spa complex." Alexander waved a dismissive hand. "No business. Not for the first 24 hours. That's a rule." "But you told your wife." "I told my wife what she needed to hear," he said softly. "This trip is for us, to celebrate closing the deal, to celebrate you." Isabella blushed a charming pink. She was smart, and part of her knew her position was precarious. But his confidence was contagious. He made her believe the fantasy was sustainable. She let herself go, believing that his compliments about her fresh perspective on architecture were more than just pillow talk. She believed he saw her as a partner, not just an affair. Mid-flight, he gave her a gift, a small, dark green box from Asprey. Inside was a delicate diamond necklace with a starry design. "Alexander, I can't," she gasped, though her hands were already reaching for it. "Don't be ridiculous. It looked like you," he said in a low purr. He got up and clasped it around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. A star on the rise. The gesture, the opulence, the sheer intoxicating romance of it all was overwhelming. "No one has ever treated me like this," Isabella murmured. "Get used to it," he said, kissing her as the jet charted its course south through the night sky. Alexander felt utterly invincible. He had mastered the art of compartmentalization. Victoria and the baby were in one box, safe and waiting for him back in New York. Isabella and this vibrant, thrilling getaway were in another. He could move between them, taking what he needed from each. A king of two separate, perfectly managed kingdoms. He was so absorbed in his own brilliance, so captivated by the reflection of the powerful man he saw in Isabella's adoring eyes, that he missed the small details. He didn't notice the subtle, almost imperceptible flash in the professional smile of the flight attendant, Anya, when she looked at him. He didn't think twice about the fact that he was using his corporate account with VistaJet, an account so vast and complex, managed by a team of people, that he never bothered with the fine print. He just made the call, and the silver jet appeared. He was the client, the master of his universe. While Alexander and Isabella were suspended in their luxurious bubble, Victoria was on the ground, and her world was anything but serene. The placid maternal calm she projected was a carefully constructed mask. Beneath it, her mind was a whirlwind of suspicion, hurt, and a cold, calculating rage. The first thread had unraveled a month ago. It was a receipt carelessly left in a jacket pocket she was sending to the dry cleaner. It wasn't for a restaurant or a bar. It was from Hermès for a Birkin bag in a striking turquoise shade. The cost was astronomical. It wasn't her birthday or their anniversary. When she asked casually, Alexander had been impeccably smooth. "An early gift, darling. They're holding it for you. I wanted it to be a surprise. But the lie didn't add up. The name of the sales associate on the receipt, Jocelyn, was one she didn't recognize from her usual contact at the store. A tiny detail, but Victoria's family, the Ruiz de la Vega clan, had built a financial empire by noticing small details. She began to truly watch. She noticed the way Alexander pulled his phone away from her, the sudden frequency of late-night conference calls with Asia. She noticed the new, almost desperate energy he had, a kind of vitality that felt disconnected from their life together. The confirmation came from an unlikely source. Her cousin, Sophia. Sophia, who worked in art curation, had called her from Miami 2 weeks prior. "Vicky, darling, you're not going to believe who I just saw at your place," Sophia had chirped. "Alexander. I didn't want to bother him. He seemed to be in a deep conversation with some blonde, an architect from his office, I think. She introduced herself at Art Basel last year. Isabella. That's it. She's on the new project." Alexander was supposed to be in Bilbao that week, closing a deal. The world tilted on its axis. The pain was a physical blow, a wrenching ache in her chest that made it hard to breathe. For a day, she allowed herself to feel it. She lay in her bed, surrounded by his scent, and wept for the life she thought she had. She wept for her unborn son. But Victoria Ruiz de la Vega was not a woman who wallowed. Tears were a luxury, and she had work to do. By the second day, the pain had crystallized into something harder, colder. Determination. A messy public confrontation was not her style. It was theatrical and ultimately powerless. Yelling and crying would only give him the satisfaction of seeing her broken. No, she would not give him that. She would not be a victim. She would be a strategist. She didn't hire a private investigator. They were messy, and their loyalty was always for sale. Instead, she used a far more powerful tool, her own name. The Ruiz de la Vega family had deep ties in global finance, security, and data analytics. She made a single, quiet call to a consultant in Geneva her father had used for decades, a man who could find a ghost in a machine. She didn't ask for photos or sordid details. She asked for data points, travel manifests, corporate credit card expenses, communication logs, instruments of precision, not blunt objects. The data came back in 48 hours, a tidy, encrypted file that laid bare the entire affair. The hotels, the gifts, including the turquoise Birkin that had been delivered to a chic downtown apartment. And most importantly, the upcoming flight. A VistaJet Bombardier Global 7152 booked from New York to a private resort for 2 passengers, Alexander Evans and a Miss Isabella Fuentes. The booking was for 4 days at the island's most exclusive villa, the Sanctuary. Seeing it all in black and white was brutal, but it was also clarifying. Her husband's betrayal wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a parallel life, meticulously planned. He had built an entire world without her, using the resources she had helped to create. And that's when she saw it. A detail buried in the corporate financial records that the consultant had included. The payments for Alexander's frequent private flights were not made directly to VistaJet. They were channeled through a parent company, a management firm called Aerolux Holdings. Aerolux Holdings. The name triggered a memory. Victoria spent the next 2 days not in the nursery, but in her home office, a sleek space with glass walls that Alexander rarely entered. Her background wasn't just in art history. Her father had insisted she get an MBA. She understood balance sheets and investment portfolios better than Alexander ever gave her credit for. She pulled up the files for her own private equity firm, Ruiz Capital. It was her own company, funded by her inheritance, and it was spectacularly successful. It specialized in what she called stealth infrastructure, companies that were essential but unglamorous, logistics, data centers, and, yes, specialized transportation. 6 months ago, her firm had led a consortium in a majority acquisition of a major aviation services company. The company had a diverse portfolio, including ground services, fleet management, and a controlling stake in a premier charter management firm. The firm was Aerolux Holdings. She stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with a terrifying, thrilling certainty. Alexander's affair, his lies, his flagrant disrespect. It was all being facilitated by a system she now controlled. He was using her own assets to betray her. The irony was so profound, it was almost poetic. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Victoria's face. The pain in her chest was still there, a hard, cold knot, but now it was accompanied by a surge of pure, unadulterated power. He thought he was the master of his universe. He had forgotten one crucial detail. A Ruiz de la Vega wife is never just a planet in a man's orbit. Sometimes, she is the gravitational force that can pull his sun down. She wouldn't cancel his flight. She wouldn't freeze his credit cards. That was too simple, too quick. The punishment had to fit the crime. The humiliation had to be as grand as the deception. She booked a first-class commercial flight to the island for the next day. She packed a small bag. She would be there waiting for him. He was flying on her plane. He was staying in a villa her company had booked through its services. He was about to land in a paradise that only she had the power to turn into his personal hell. The small plane descended steeply toward the island's airport, a runway famous for its breathtakingly short strip that ends at a sandy beach. While other passengers gasped or grabbed their armrests, Victoria remained perfectly still, looking out the window at the impossibly blue water. She felt no fear, only a deep, chilling calm. She was a general surveying the battlefield before the first shot was fired. She had arrived a full day ahead of Alexander. On the tarmac, she was met by a man named Jean-Luc, the regional manager for Aerolux Holdings. He was a neat, efficient Frenchman in his 50s, a man who understood power and, more importantly, discretion. His office in New York had arranged everything. "Mrs. Evans," he said, bowing his head slightly. "Welcome to the island. It is an honor to have you." He already knew her as Victoria Ruiz de la Vega, the formidable head of Ruiz Capital. The name Evans was a new and clearly significant addition. "Thank you, Jean-Luc." "Thank you. Please, call me Victoria." Her tone was warm, but left no room for familiarity. "I trust everything is in order." "Perfectly, madame," Jean-Luc affirmed. "Good. My husband will expect a car to take him to the villa. That car will not arrive. His luggage will be held here at the FBO, awaiting my instructions. His credit lines associated with this facility and our partners on the island are to be temporarily suspended. The booking at the sanctuary has been amended. The new primary guest is me. The villa's security team is now my security." She paused, letting the weight of her orders sink in. She was systematically dismantling his power, brick by brick. "You are to greet him and his guest as you would any other client, escort them to the main lounge, offer them a drink, and then inform me that they have arrived. I will take care of the rest." That night, Victoria did not retreat to the opulent villa. Instead, she stayed in a modest but comfortable room at the FBO reserved for flight crew. She ate a simple meal of grilled fish and rice. She spent the night not in rage, but in quiet preparation. She reviewed Aerolux's quarterly reports, her mind sharp and focused. She was reclaiming not just her marriage, but her own identity. an identity she had allowed to be suppressed by the role of Alexander Evans's wife. The next day, as the Caribbean sun climbed high in the sky, she dressed with care. She chose a simple but elegant white linen maternity dress. It was chic and comfortable, but also served a purpose. It was a visual reminder of what and who Alexander was betraying. She wore flat sandals on her slightly swollen feet. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant bun. She wore no jewelry, save for her wedding rings and a simple watch. She was not a scorned woman dressed for a fight. She was a CEO about to carry out a hostile takeover of her own life. She sat in Jean-Luc's private office, which had a one-way glass window overlooking the lounge. She had a bottle of cold water and her son's latest ultrasound, which she had placed face down on the desk. At 2:15 p.m., Jean-Luc's phone rang. He listened for a moment and then looked at Victoria. "Madame, the Global 7152 has begun its final approach. ETA 10 minutes. Victoria took a slow, deep breath, her hand resting on her stomach. The baby shifted with a gentle kick. "It's okay, little one. Mama's got this," she whispered softly. She stood up, the picture of maternal serenity. But in her eyes, a storm was brewing. The calm before the strike. The final moment of silence before the immutable laws of Alexander Evans's universe were about to be shattered. The descent into paradise was spectacular. Alexander made sure Isabella had the best view, pointing out the mega yachts dotting the harbor and the red-roofed villas clinging to the green hillsides. "Welcome to my office," he said with a grand gesture, his voice as smooth as the scotch in his glass. Isabella was mesmerized. The last 4 hours had been a blur of luxury she could barely comprehend. The champagne, the gourmet food, the sheer freedom of soaring above the clouds had worked on her like a powerful drug. She felt giddy, special, chosen. The diamond necklace felt cool against her skin, a sparkling, constant reminder of her new reality. "I can't believe this is real," she said, her face pressed against the window. "It's like a postcard." "It's better than a postcard. It's ours for the next 4 days," Alexander corrected her. "The villa I booked has a private beach and a recording studio. Apparently, a rock star used to own it. He was in his element, the magnanimous host, the provider of dreams. The flight had been perfect. The crew had been attentive but discreet. He had successfully transitioned from his life in New York to his life on the island. The compartmentalization was complete. As the jet touched down with a gentle bump and taxied to the private terminal, Alexander was already planning their night. A swim, cocktails by the infinity pool, a private chef preparing whatever their hearts desired. "Anya," he called to the flight attendant as she prepared the cabin for arrival. "Have the chauffeur send our bags to the villa. We'll head straight there." "Of course, Mr. Evans," Anya responded. Her smile was as practiced as ever, but if one looked closely, there was a new, almost imperceptible stiffness in her posture, a hint of deference that was directed not at him, but at something beyond him. Alexander, of course, didn't notice. The cabin door opened, and a wave of warm, humid, salty air flooded the space. It was the smell of freedom and escape. Alexander put on his sunglasses, the very image of effortless power. He took Isabella's hand. "Ready for paradise?" he asked. "More than ready," she smiled. They descended the stairs onto the hot tarmac. 2 ground crew members waited at the bottom. Alexander expected one of them to be his chauffeur holding a sign. Instead, they were greeted by the FBO manager, a man he recognized from previous trips. "Mr. Evans, welcome back. Ms. Fuentes," the manager said, with a polite but formal nod. "If you'll please follow me to the lounge, we can process your arrival." Alexander felt a flash of annoyance. "That's not necessary. Just have the chauffeur take us. The villa is waiting." "My apologies, sir, but we must insist. There are some new arrival protocols we need to confirm. It will only take a moment." The manager's tone was impeccably polite, yet strangely unyielding. It was the tone of an employee following a strict, non-negotiable order. Alexander sighed, frustrated by the bureaucratic delay, but unwilling to make a scene. "Fine, let's make it quick." He and Isabella were escorted across the tarmac and into the cool, air-conditioned FBO. The lounge was tasteful and deserted, with white leather sofas and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the runway. "Can I offer you something to drink while you wait?" the manager asked. "Water? Champagne?" "We've had enough champagne," Alexander said dryly. "Just arrange for the car." "Of course, sir." The manager gave a slight bow and retreated, leaving them alone. Isabella walked to the window, looking at their silver jet. "He seemed a little stiff," she commented. "Island bureaucracy," Alexander scoffed, loosening his collar. "They get a little power, and it goes to their heads. Don't worry. 5 more minutes, and we'll be by the pool." He sank into one of the leather sofas, tapping his foot impatiently. He checked his phone. Still no service. The momentary delay was a small grain of sand in the well-oiled machine of his life, and it irritated him. The seconds stretched into a minute, then 2. The silence in the lounge was absolute, broken only by the faint, clinical hum of the air conditioning. The initial excitement of arrival was beginning to curdle into a strange sense of unease. Something was off. The formal greeting, the insistence on going to the lounge, the delay with the car. It was all a little too controlled. "What's taking so long?" Isabella asked, her voice tinged with the same disquiet. "I'm going to find out," Alexander said, his patience finally snapping. He stood up, ready to go, and demand the service he was paying a fortune for. At that exact moment, a door across the lounge opened, and his world stopped spinning. The door opened, not with a bang, but with a soft pneumatic hiss that seemed to suck all the air from the room. Alexander, mid-stride from arrogant impatience, froze. His body went rigid, every muscle locking as his brain struggled to process an image so wildly out of context, so utterly impossible, it felt like a hallucination. Victoria entered the lounge. She moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a queen entering her court, her presence instantly dominating the space. The harsh Caribbean light that flooded the windows seemed to soften around her, catching the gentle curve of her white linen dress. Her pregnancy was not a vulnerability, but her armor, a potent, undeniable symbol of the life he had so casually betrayed. Her face, pale and serene, was a mask of placid control. But her eyes, when they met his across the expanse of polished concrete, were like chips of dark glacial ice. Behind her, like 2 sentinels, were Jean-Luc and the FBO manager. Their professional neutrality had sharpened into something else, the unwavering deference of soldiers standing behind their commander. Victoria. The name escaped Alexander's lips as a choked, incredulous whisper. The universe, which had always bent to his will, had suddenly fractured. His mind, usually a high-speed calculator of angles and leverage, went blank. He fumbled for a narrative, any narrative that could contain this anomaly. A surprise? Had she decided to join him? Was she checking up on him? No. The chilling stillness in her gaze, the absolute absence of warmth, dismissed those possibilities instantly. Isabella, who had been admiring the sleek lines of the jet, turned at the sound of his voice. Her expression of carefree awe dissolved into a mosaic of confusion. then dawning horror. Her eyes moved from the ethereal figure in white to Alexander's stunned face, and then, inexorably, to the perfect pronounced sphere of Victoria's belly. A baby. The realization hit her with the physical force of a slap. This was not an ex-wife or a distant business partner. This was the wife, the 9-month pregnant wife, the entire glittering fantasy Alexander had built for her, a world of private jets, discreet getaways, and a future untethered from his past, shattered into a million pieces of cheap, gaudy glass. She was a cliché. She was the other woman. Victoria's gaze remained fixed on her husband. She ignored Isabella, leaving her completely insignificant. She began to walk toward him, her flat sandals making no sound, her slow, measured pace amplifying the unbearable tension in the room. Alexander's instincts, honed over 1,000 hostile negotiations, finally kicked in. He tried to take control of the narrative, to cast himself as the victim of a misunderstanding. "My God, what are you doing here?" His voice a strained imitation of concern. He took a step toward her, hands half raised as if to comfort her. "Is everything all right? The baby? Did something happen? You shouldn't be traveling, not in your condition. You should have called me." It was a masterful performance, an attempt to paint her as reckless, and him as the caring, responsible husband. But the words evaporated in the frigid atmosphere she had created. She stopped just a few feet from him. "You're right," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm, a placid lake over a bottomless abyss. "I shouldn't have to travel, but there were some urgent business matters that required my personal attention. Here, with my company." She let the last words hang in the air. As if on cue, Jean-Luc stepped forward. His posture was rigid, his voice crisp and formal, filling the silence. "Mr. Evans, Ms. Fuentes," he began, his eyes fixed on a point just above Alexander's head. "On behalf of the Board of Directors of Aerolux Holdings and its portfolio of managed assets, I would like to formally welcome the chairwoman of our primary investment group. Ladies and gentlemen, your hostess here on the island, Mrs. Victoria Evans." The flight attendant, Anya, who had discreetly entered the lounge with the rest of her crew, now stood at attention. The practiced customer service smile was gone, replaced by an expression of deep respect directed only at Victoria. "Welcome, madame." Her voice was clear and formal. "We are at your disposal. Aerolux Holdings. Chairwoman. My team." The phrases detonated in Alexander's mind. He saw a flash of an invoice from his accounting department, a name he had barely registered, a simple line item in the vast budget of his extravagance. His gaze flickered to the silver jet glistening on the tarmac, and then back to the serene, powerful woman standing before him. The plane, the FBO, the flight crew. It wasn't his power. He wasn't the client. He was cargo. He was flying on her plane. The blood drained from his face, and the air conditioning suddenly felt arctic. His entire world had been recontextualized in a matter of seconds. He was an intruder in his own life. Victoria's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile that held no warmth. "I trust your flight was comfortable, Alexander." Her voice was sweet and venomous nectar. "The Dom Perignon, 2008. It was chilled to your liking. I made sure to note your preferences. My team prides itself on its attention to detail, its discretion." Each word was a surgical strike that showed the depth of her knowledge, the totality of her control. She knew, not just in the abstract. She knew everything. Only then, after having completely dismantled her husband's authority, did Victoria finally turn her gaze to Isabella. She didn't look at her with the rage of a scorned wife. It was infinitely worse. She looked at her with the cool, indifferent disinterest of a CEO reviewing an unnecessary expense. Isabella flinched instinctively, her hand going to her chest, her fingers brushing against the cold, hard diamonds of the necklace. It suddenly felt like a dog collar. "Ms. Fuentes," Victoria said, her tone shifting from intimate irony to dry corporate dismissal. "Isabella Fuentes, a junior architect at Alexander Holdings. I've reviewed your file. Your performance has been adequate." The faint praise was more damning than any insult. "I'm afraid your particular architectural expertise is no longer needed for the project. In fact, your employment with Alexander Holdings is terminated, effective immediately. Your flight back to New York has been arranged for this evening on a commercial airline in economy class. A shuttle will take you to the commercial terminal in 30 minutes. Victoria paused. Her eyes dropped briefly to the diamond necklace. "You may keep the necklace. Consider it a severance package, a costly lesson on the difference between a man's affection and his assets." Isabella stood paralyzed, her face ashen. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't dare let them fall. She was being erased, not just from Alexander's life, but from the very room she was standing in. Victoria turned her attention back to the man she had married. Her voice became lower and more intimate once more, a confidential whisper that was the most terrifying sound he had ever heard. "As for you, darling," she purred, using the term of endearment as a weapon, "it appears there's been a catastrophic mix-up with your accommodations. The sanctuary is a lovely place. I'll be staying there. The reservation has been transferred to my personal account. Your corporate credit cards, along with your personal ones linked to our joint accounts, have been suspended pending a full audit of unauthorized expenses. And this plane?" She gestured elegantly toward the tarmac. "Well, it is undergoing unscheduled maintenance. Indefinitely. It won't be leaving until I say so." She took one last step toward him, closing the distance between them. He could smell her perfume, the familiar Chanel No. 5, which now seemed alien and menacing. He could see the deep, abyssal pain that fueled the icy fire in her eyes. "You wanted a getaway, Alexander, an escape to a paradise where the normal rules didn't apply to you." Her voice a devastating blow meant for him alone. "Congratulations, you found it. Welcome to my island. And on my island, I make the rules." With that final declaration, she turned her back on him. A final gesture of dismissal. Jean-Luc ordered without looking back, "Please escort Ms. Fuentes to a private waiting area and ensure her travel documents are in order. My husband and I have some marital assets to discuss." As Jean-Luc gently but firmly guided Isabella's ghostly figure from the room, Alexander was left alone in the deafening silence. A spectacularly dethroned king in a kingdom he didn't even know he didn't own. He was stranded, stripped of everything except the crushing weight of his own folly, facing the pregnant wife he had wronged and the terrifying unknown reign that had just begun. The void Isabella left behind was instantly filled with a silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure. It was a heavy, humming stillness, punctuated only by the faint clinical hum of the air conditioning and the sound of Alexander's own blood roaring in his ears. He stood motionless in the center of the lounge, the tailored fabric of his Tom Ford suit suddenly feeling coarse and suffocating, like a prison uniform. Outside, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Caribbean sun beat down on the tarmac with a mocking, brilliant indifference. His paradise had been turned into a sterile observation room, and he was the specimen under glass. Victoria watched him for a long moment, unblinking. There was no triumph in her expression, not a flicker of vengeful glee. There was only the cold, dispassionate focus of a master strategist inspecting a board after a decisive, game-ending move. She moved from her position by the door and sank gracefully onto the white leather sofa he had occupied only moments ago, a subtle but unmistakable act of usurpation. She owned this space now. She patted the cushion next to her, her hand moving in a slow, deliberate motion. It wasn't an invitation for him to join her. It was a summons for a subordinate. Every instinct in Alexander's body screamed at him to lash out, to yell, to break something. But his limbs felt disconnected from his will, heavy and useless. He walked the 10 feet to the sofa, as if wading through cement, the short distance feeling like the longest, most shameful walk of his life. He sat down, not next to her, but on the very edge of the cushion she had indicated, perched there like a disgraced schoolboy. The chasm between them was now measured in inches, but it felt a mile wide. How? The word was a dry scratch, the only sound his throat could produce. How did you know? Victoria turned her head to look at him fully, her gaze analytical. Do you want the forensics of your failure? Very well. Her voice was a low, even cadence. It started with a receipt. Hermes, for a Birkin bag in a particularly garish shade of turquoise. It was in your jacket pocket. You've always been so meticulous, Alexander, but arrogance breeds carelessness. It's the fatal flaw of men who believe in their own mythology. She continued her narrative, a clinical dissection of his betrayal. You said it was a pregnancy gift for me. A clumsy lie. I know my sales associate. The name on the receipt was not one I recognized. A small thread, so I pulled on it. You hired a private investigator, he muttered, a desperate attempt to frame her actions as something equally sordid. A faint, joyless smile touched her lips. Don't be so common. Private investigators are for wives without resources. I, on the other hand, had our complete financial records, she said, letting the nuance of our twist in the air. I simply had my family office in Geneva run an analysis. Your late-night conference calls with Asia corresponded perfectly with charges at restaurants near your architect's apartment. The weekend you were supposedly snowed in at a conference in Bilbao. That was a very sunny few days in Miami, according to a transaction at Casa Tua that my cousin Sophia was kind enough to mention. You were leaving a digital and financial trail of breadcrumbs, and you were too self-absorbed to notice. She leaned back, her hand resting protectively on her belly. But the masterpiece of your stupidity was booking this trip. You funneled the payment through Aerolux Holdings to keep it off the Alexander Holdings ledger. What you failed to realize, in your profound underestimation of me, is that my little private equity firm, Ruiz Capital, led a majority acquisition of Aerolux 6 months ago. You see, Alexander, while you were busy building your fantasy, I was busy buying the infrastructure that supported it. You didn't just use your money to betray me. You used mine. The full, horrible irony of it washed over him like a wave of nausea. He hadn't just been caught in a lie. He had bankrolled his own execution. A flash of his old self, the cornered fighter, surfaced. So, what is this, Vicky? A grand spectacle before you call the lawyers? You'll divorce me? Take half of everything and drag my name through the mud? Victoria's laugh was a short, sharp, shocking sound in the quiet room. Divorce, she said, shaking her head, as if amused by his lack of imagination. Oh, Alexander, a divorce is an ending. It's a release. A divorce gives you a narrative. The tragic tycoon, the fallen titan. You could rebuild from that. I have no intention of giving you an ending. I'm not interested in destroying you. I'm interested in owning you. He stared at her, his mind unable to grasp her meaning. Our son, she said, her voice softening infinitesimally as she spoke of him. He will not be the product of a broken home. He will not be fodder for gossip columns. He will grow up with a father and a mother under the same roof. Our marriage will continue. From the outside, nothing will have changed. You will be the powerful, brilliant Alexander Evans, and I will be your devoted wife. We will be the perfect family." "And in private?" he whispered, his throat tight with dread. "In private," she said, her voice returning to its icy temperature. "You will cease to exist. Your affair has obviously ended. Tomorrow morning, you will call Isabella to your office and read a script my lawyers are drafting. It will terminate her employment and present her with a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive she won't be able to whisper your name to her therapist. You will do this calmly and without deviation. Financially," she continued, "you are insolvent. As we speak, my office is executing a legal maneuver that places a lien on all of your personal assets, citing the misappropriation of marital funds. Your access to all accounts has been revoked. You will be given a monthly stipend deposited into a new account I control. It will be sufficient for your suits and your meals. A trust fund, an allowance." The word hung in the air, a profound humiliation. "And Alexander Holdings?" Her relentless precision continued. "It is no longer your kingdom. It is a subsidiary. A new Ruiz de la Vega Strategic Review Board will be implemented by the end of the week. They will have final sign-off on all transactions over $50,000. You will still have your beautiful office, your title, your public role, but you will be a figurehead, a well-managed brand. My brand." His composure finally broke. "You can't," he hissed, the words a desperate, powerless whisper. "I built that company with my own hands." "Did you?" she countered, her voice dangerously quiet. "Or did you build it with loans guaranteed by my father? With the credibility of the Ruiz de la Vega name opening doors you couldn't? With the seed money from my inheritance that you called a marital investment? If you try to fight me, Alexander, I will not only win. I will unleash a legal and financial storm that will salt the very earth you stand on. I will dismantle Alexander Holdings piece by piece and sell it to your competitors. I will leave you with nothing but a mountain of debt and a legacy of failure. Now tell me, is that a fight you want to have?" He slumped, defeated. The fight was gone, extinguished by the cold, irrefutable truth. He had mistaken her support for subservience. He had mistaken her quiet intelligence for passivity. He had built his empire on her foundation, and she had just reclaimed the land. The audience had concluded. "The jet will be ready for your departure at 0800 tomorrow. You will fly back to New York, alone. When you arrive at the penthouse, you will find your belongings in the guest suite in the East Wing. You will tell the staff it is so. Not to disturb me or the baby with your late nights. You will be convincing." She walked toward the door, stopping with her hand on the handle. She looked at him, a solitary, broken man, adrift in a sea of white leather. "And Alexander," she said, her voice with one last chilling note of instruction. "When our son is born, you will hold him. You will love him, and every day you will look into his eyes, and you will remember that his existence is the only reason I am allowing you to continue living the life you so desperately pretend to deserve. Your entire world now hangs on that one fragile thread. Never forget it." She opened the door and walked out into the dazzling sun without looking back. The door closed with a hiss, sealing him inside the silent, air-conditioned tomb he had created for himself. So what happens when the ultimate power play isn't in the boardroom, but in a marriage? Alexander learned the hard way. He was left with his penthouse, his title, and his name, but he lost his freedom, trapped in a life that was now managed and owned by the woman he betrayed. His story is a chilling reminder that the quietest people in the room are often the most powerful, and that underestimating the person you share your life with can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. What would you have done in Victoria's place? Would you have chosen public annihilation or a private prison for the man who broke your heart? Let me know your opinion in the comments. If you love stories of drama and sweet, calculated revenge, be sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more unforgettable tales.